said, "I feared him." But the truth behind the men he feared is not the story people think. The invincible monster who dominated WCW with a streak that reached 173-0 was hiding something. Behind the pyrotechnics and the spear and the jackhammer was a man who knew exactly who could destroy him. A man who understood that without cooperation, his dominance was just an illusion. A man who feared exposure, injury, and the real fighters who could end his career in seconds. This is the story of 10 wrestlers Bill Goldberg feared the most. And it starts with understanding what fear really means in professional wrestling. Goldberg exploded onto the wrestling scene in the late 1990s like a freight train. He came from the NFL, where he was a nose tackle who collided with offensive linemen every Sunday. He was 6'4" and 285 pounds of pure muscle. He looked like a superhero. He acted like a gladiator. WCW marketed him as a man who feared nothing. The streak grew and grew. 90 seconds, spear, jackhammer, next victim. Who's next? The fans chanted it. The announcers screamed it. Goldberg became the biggest star in wrestling almost overnight. But here is what they did not tell you. Goldberg was rushed to the main event with almost no training. Most wrestlers spend decades learning how to protect themselves and their opponents. They learn the hooks and the holds. They learn how to shoot, which means actually fighting. They learn how to work, which means making it look real without hurting anyone. Goldberg learned at the WCW power plant for a few months. Then they threw him on television. He was a raw athlete in a world full of trained killers, and Goldberg knew it. He knew he did not have the skills that other men had. He knew that if someone decided not to cooperate with him, he would look foolish, or worse, he would get hurt. So his fears were not about losing scripted matches. His fears were about three very specific things. Type 1 fear was the fear of legitimate combat. This was the fear of wrestlers who could actually hurt you or kill you in a real fight. These men had backgrounds in judo or amateur wrestling or street fighting. They were the police of the locker room. For a green wrestler like Goldberg, these men were untouchable. You did not mess with them. You did not take liberties with them. You respected them or you paid the price. Type 2 fear was the fear of professional exposure. This was the fear of being embarrassed on live television. A skilled technician could tie you up in knots. They could make you look slow and clumsy and weak without ever throwing a real punch. For a character built entirely on dominance, this was worse than a beating. This was the destruction of the entire gimmick. This was career suicide. Type 3 fear was the fear of unpredictability. This was the fear of working with wrestlers who were unsafe, chemically unstable, or just plain reckless. These men might hurt you by accident, or they might hurt you on purpose if they got angry. Either way, your career could end in one bad night. Goldberg experienced all three types of fear during his career, and the men who triggered these fears are the ones we are about to discuss. But before we do, we need to clear up a major confusion. There is a viral video called Ric Flair names 10 wrestlers he feared the most. That list includes names like Mad Dog Vachon, in Harley Race, and Dick Slater. People often think that is Goldberg's list. It is not. Goldberg never made a formal top 10 list, but he has talked about the men who intimidated him. He has admitted his fears in shoot interviews. And when we combine those admissions with the overlapping names from Flair's list, we get the real story, the story of the men who made the monster feel human. Professional wrestling is not like other sports. The outcomes are predetermined. Everyone knows who will win before the bell rings, but the pain is real, the injuries are real, and the social hierarchies are brutally real. In this world, Goldberg was an outsider. He did not come up through the territories. He did not pay his dues in bingo halls and carnivals. He was given everything based on his look and his intensity, and the veterans knew it. They resented it, and some of them were waiting for a chance to expose him. Now let us talk about those men, starting with number 10 and counting down to the one man Goldberg truly feared above all others. Number 10 is Kevin Nash. Now, Kevin Nash was not a legitimate tough guy. He was tall and he was big, but he was not a shooter. He could not stretch you like an amateur wrestler. He could not choke you out like a judoka. But Kevin Nash had something more dangerous than fighting skills. He had the pencil. In wrestling, the pencil is the booking power. It is the ability to decide who wins and who loses. It is the ability to make someone look like a star or make them look like a joke. Kevin Nash was one of the bookers during Goldberg's peak in WCW, and Nash did not like Goldberg. Nash thought Goldberg was overrated. He thought Goldberg was a creation of Eric Bischoff who did not deserve the spot. So Nash used his power to sabotage Goldberg. He was the one who ended the streak. He was the one who booked himself to beat Goldberg at Starrcade 1998, and he did it in the most humiliating way possible, with a cattle prod, with outside interference. With Kevin Nash standing standing tall over the fallen monster. Goldberg feared Nash because Nash controlled his destiny. Nash could make him look weak whenever he wanted, and Nash did exactly that. He put himself over at Goldberg's expense. He used his wit and his backstage influence to frame Goldberg as one-dimensional and boring. Goldberg was isolated in WCW. He was not part of the clique, which was Nash and Scott Hall and Sean Waltman. He was not part of the Old Boys Club, which was Hulk Hogan and Rick Flair. He was alone, and Nash made sure everyone knew it. This was political fear, the fear of being buried by someone who held the power. And for Goldberg, it was a fear that came true. Nash not only ended the streak, but he made sure the ending looked cheap. He made sure it looked like Goldberg was vulnerable. He made sure the aura was shattered. This was not a physical beating. This was a political assassination, and Goldberg was powerless to stop it. Number 9 is The Undertaker. Now, this might surprise you. The Undertaker was not on Goldberg's radar during the WCW days. They did not wrestle until much later when both men were in WWE. And by that time, both men were older, both men were slower, both men were more fragile. But The Undertaker represents a very specific kind of fear for Goldberg, the fear of killing a legend. In 2019, Goldberg faced The Undertaker at Super Showdown in Saudi Arabia. It was supposed to be a dream match, 2 legends, 2 icons, but it turned into a nightmare. Goldberg got concussed early in the match. His brain was scrambled. He could not think straight. He could not move right. But the match had to continue. The cameras were rolling. The crowd was watching. And then came the moment that haunts Goldberg to this day. He attempted to hit a jackhammer on The Undertaker. The jackhammer was his finishing move. He had done it thousands of times. But this time, something went wrong. He lost his grip. He lost his strength. And he dropped The Undertaker directly on his head. The sound was sickening. The Undertaker crumpled. The referee checked on him. The match somehow continued, but everyone watching knew something terrible had almost happened. The Undertaker could have been paralyzed. He could have been killed, and Goldberg knew it. He has said since then, "I have been remorseful ever since." This was not the fear of getting hurt himself. This was the fear of being remembered as the man who ended The Undertaker's career, or worse, the man who ended The Undertaker's life. This was the fear of his own diminishing capabilities, the fear that his mind was willing but his body was failing, the fear that he was now a danger to everyone around him, including the legends he grew up respecting. This fear is different from the others on this list. It is not about intimidation or politics or embarrassment. It is about mortality. It is about realizing that you are past your prime. It is about knowing that you should not be in the ring anymore, but being unable to walk away from the spotlight. For Goldberg, that match with The Undertaker was a wake-up call, but it was a wake-up call that came too late. Number 8 is Rick Steiner. Rick Steiner was the quieter of the 2 Steiner brothers, but that did not make him less dangerous. Rick was an amateur wrestling champion. He had the skills to stretch anyone in the locker room. He was known as an enforcer. He was known for initiating rookies with rough ribs and stiff shots. And he was known as someone you did not cross. Goldberg has a famous story about spearing Rick Steiner so hard that Rick's sunglasses stayed on his face. People laugh at that story. They think it shows how powerful Goldberg was. They think it shows that Goldberg was not afraid of anyone. But the research reveals a darker truth. Rick Steiner was one of the few men who could bully the bullies. He had nothing to prove. And Goldberg, despite his size, was still a rookie in Rick's eyes. The fear Goldberg had of Rick was about hierarchy. It was about respect. You did not take liberties with Rick Steiner because Rick Steiner had the credentials to hurt you and the reputation to get away with it. Rick was part of the old guard. He came up through the territories. He earned his spot, and he did not appreciate newcomers like Goldberg getting pushed to the top without paying dues. Rick Steiner played rough ribs. He tested people. He made sure they belonged in the locker room. And for Goldberg, who was surrounded by men who resented his success, Rick represented the possibility of a very painful lesson. Goldberg's respect for Rick was fear disguised as admiration. It was the understanding that if Rick wanted to hurt him, there was nothing Goldberg could do to stop it. Number 7 is Chris Jericho. Now, Chris Jericho does not fit the profile of a typical tough guy. He was not 6'5". He was not 280 pounds. He did not have an NFL background or an amateur wrestling pedigree. But Chris Jericho had something that terrified Goldberg. He had wit. He had technical skill. And he had the ability to expose Goldberg as a fraud. In 1998, Jericho was a mid-card cruiserweight in WCW. He launched a satirical feud against Goldberg. He called him Greenberg. He mocked the streak. He staged elaborate skits where he defeated a midget dressed as Goldberg. It was comedy gold for the fans. The segments were hilarious. Jericho was at his creative best, but Goldberg hated it. He absolutely despised it, and he refused to work with Jericho. People thought Goldberg refused because Jericho was beneath him. They thought Goldberg was protecting his monster character by not acknowledging a smaller wrestler. But the research shows the real reason. Goldberg feared humiliation. He knew Jericho was witty and quick on the microphone. He knew Jericho was technically brilliant in the ring. Engaging with Jericho meant entering a battle Goldberg would lose. Jericho would make him look slow and dumb and one-dimensional. So Goldberg protected his aura by refusing to acknowledge Jericho at all, but the fear caught up with him. In 2003, both men were in WWE. They had a confrontation in the locker room. The details vary depending on who tells the story, but the basic facts are agreed upon. Goldberg, angry and aggressive, grabbed Jericho by the throat. He thought his size would intimidate the smaller man. He thought Jericho would back down. But Jericho did not panic. Jericho used his training. He caught Goldberg in a front face lock, which is basically a guillotine choke. He torqued Goldberg's neck. He controlled the larger man, and he held him there until Booker T and Hurricane Helms separated them. This was a shoot. This was a real fight, and the smaller man won. Goldberg was humbled. He later apologized to Jericho. He admitted he was wrong, and he praised Jericho for being a good person despite their history. This was type 2 fear realized. The fear of being exposed as weaker than you appear. The fear that technique and heart matter more than size. The fear that the character you play is just a character, and the real you is vulnerable. Number 6 is the Barbarian. The Barbarian was Meng's tag team partner in the Faces of Fear, and while he did not have Meng's mythical reputation, he was still legitimately terrifying. The Barbarian was a powerhouse. He had immense static strength. He could hurt you by accident or on purpose, and he was loyal to Meng, which meant crossing him was crossing both of them. Goldberg listed the Barbarian alongside Meng as one of the toughest men he ever faced, and the reason is simple. Goldberg's entire offense was built on overpowering his opponents. He would rush them, he would spear them, he would lift them for the jackhammer, but the Barbarian was a wall. He was not easy to move. He did not cooperate easily, and that meant Goldberg had to exert true force to execute his moves. This created a fear of physical exhaustion and failure. What if Goldberg could not lift the Barbarian? What if the Barbarian no-sold the spear? What if Goldberg's signature moves did not work? The fear was not that the Barbarian would shoot on him. The fear was that the Barbarian would expose the limitations of Goldberg's strength. And in a business built on the illusion of power, that exposure was deadly. The Barbarian also represented something else. He was part of a team with Meng, and in the locker room, that meant he had backup. If you disrespected the Barbarian, you were disrespecting Meng, and nobody wanted that. So Goldberg's fear of the Barbarian was compounded by the knowledge that behind him stood the toughest man in wrestling history. Number 5 is Fit Finlay. Dave Finlay, known as Fit Finlay or the Belfast Bruiser, was a hardened tough guy from Northern Ireland. He wrestled for the British Crown. He loved to fight, and his style was simple. Hit hard and see if your opponent stands back up. Goldberg faced Finlay during the streak, and those matches were gritty brawls. Finlay did not care about making you look good. He cared about testing you. He was the gatekeeper. If you could not handle his stiffness, you did not belong in the main event. If you complained about pain, you were soft. If you could not keep up with his pace, you were exposed. Goldberg's respect for Finlay was rooted in fear, the fear of pain. Finlay did not play a character. He was a fighter who happened to be wrestling. And every match with Finlay was a test of how much punishment Goldberg could endure. Finlay would chop you across the chest until your skin turned purple. He would kick you in the ribs until you could not breathe. He would headbutt you until your vision blurred. And all of this was considered normal in his world. This was type 1 fear, the fear of legitimate physical damage inflicted by someone who did not care about your comfort. Finlay came from a different era. He came from a different culture. In British wrestling, you had to earn every hold. You had to prove you belonged. And Finlay brought that mentality to WCW. For Goldberg, who was used to cooperative opponents, Finlay was a shock to the system. A reminder that wrestling could still hurt. A reminder that not everyone would make him look good. Number 4 is Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar is the only wrestler who arguably surpassed Goldberg in the unstoppable monster archetype. Lesnar was an NCAA heavyweight champion. He was a UFC heavyweight champion. He was everything Goldberg was marketed to be, but for real. Lesnar had legitimate credentials. He had proven himself in actual combat. He was not just a character, he was a fighter. Goldberg openly admitted to anxiety before facing Lesnar. He called Lesnar an animal. He talked about the pressure to look physically comparable despite being a decade older. He talked about the fear of being in the ring with someone who could legitimately hurt him if things went wrong. Their first match at WrestleMania 20 was a disaster. Both men knew they were leaving WWE, and the crowd turned on them. The fans booed them out of the building. It was a soulless affair where neither man looked good. The match was slow, the moves were hesitant, and the atmosphere was toxic. But their second encounter at Survivor Series 2016 was different. Goldberg shocked the world by beating Lesnar in 86 seconds. It looked dominant. It looked easy. Spear, jackhammer, 1, 2, 3. Goldberg stood tall. The crowd went wild. It seemed like the old magic had returned, but Goldberg revealed later that he was terrified. He said he beat himself up over a minor slip in the ring. He felt he had to be perfect to stand in the ring with a legitimate killer like Lesnar. He felt the pressure of proving he still belonged. This was type 1 fear combined with type 2 fear. Lesnar could hurt him in a shoot, and Lesnar could expose him as a fake tough guy if the match went wrong. Goldberg's fear of Lesnar was the fear of being compared to the real thing and coming up short. It was the fear of standing next to someone who made you look ordinary. It was the fear of realizing that your entire career was built on smoke and mirrors, and now you were standing next to someone made of steel. Number 3 is William Regal. William Regal was not a giant. He was not a bodybuilder. He was not a street fighter. But William Regal was one of the most feared men in Goldberg's career, and the reason is simple. Regal had the ability to embarrass him. February 9, 1998, WCW Monday Nitro. Goldberg was scheduled to wrestle Lord Steven Regal. Goldberg expected a 90-second squash match. Spear, jackhammer, done. Another victory added to the streak. Another opponent destroyed, but that is not what happened. Regal grappled with him. Regal applied holds. Regal struck him with stiff forearms that visibly stunned the big man. The match became awkward. It became uncomfortable. Goldberg froze. He looked at the referee, confused and winded. He tried to pull moves, but Regal blocked them or countered them. For several agonizing minutes, the monster looked like a man in underwear who did not know how to fight. The crowd sensed something was wrong. The announcers tried to cover for it, but everyone watching could see that Goldberg was struggling. The research suggests a breakdown in communication. Regal claimed he was told to give Goldberg a competitive 6-minute match. Goldberg thought it was supposed to be a squash, but the result was clear. Regal exposed Goldberg. He proved that, without cooperation, Goldberg's dominance was an illusion. He showed that Goldberg did not know how to wrestle. He showed that Goldberg's entire offense required his opponent to willingly participate. Regal was fired shortly after, though he denies it was because of this match. But the damage was done. Goldberg learned that there were men in the locker room who could make him look foolish in front of millions of people. This was his ultimate nightmare. Type 2 fear realized. The fear of professional exposure, and it came from a man who weighed 50 pounds less than him. This incident shaped the rest of Goldberg's career. After the Regal match, Goldberg became even more protective of his character. He refused to work longer matches. He insisted on quick finishes. He avoided technical wrestlers who might expose his limitations. The Regal match taught him that his greatest vulnerability was not physical strength. It was skill, and there were men in every locker room who had that skill. Number 2 is Scott Steiner. Scott Steiner, Big Papa Pump, was perhaps the most volatile and dangerous wrestler Goldberg ever faced. By the late 1990s, Steiner had transformed from an athletic technician into a chemically enhanced monster with a hair-trigger temper. He was massive, he was strong, and he was unpredictable. His muscles had muscles. His veins bulged out of his skin, and his eyes had a wild look that suggested he was always one insult away from violence. Goldberg described his matches with Scott Steiner as stiff working matches. He said, "I am going to get in trouble for saying this. It was a stiff working match, and I like that. It does not look like it is staged." But the research reveals the truth behind that statement. Goldberg had to claim he liked it. Complaining about stiffness would be an admission of weakness, and in the macho culture of wrestling, that was unacceptable. You did not complain about pain. You did not complain about stiff shots. You took it and you gave it back. The reality was that working with Steiner was terrifying. Steiner had the amateur wrestling skills to stretch Goldberg. He was a 2-time NCAA Division I All-American. He could take Goldberg down and tie him in knots if he wanted to. He had the strength to suplex him across the ring. His signature move was the Steiner screwdriver, where he would lift an opponent upside down and drop them on their head. It was one of the most dangerous moves in wrestling, and if Goldberg failed to cooperate or tried to sandbag, Steiner had the power to force the move anyway. That meant potential injury. That meant potential paralysis. There was a no disqualification match that involved a lead pipe. The commentary noted that this was not a gimmick. This was the strongest man man in the world swinging a real lead pipe. And Goldberg had to trust that Steiner, a man known for losing his temper, would not actually crack his skull open. He had to trust that Steiner would pull his shots. He had to trust that Steiner would not let the red mist descend, and that trust was always fragile. Steiner's backstage reputation made things worse. He tried to gouge Diamond Dallas Page's eye out during a backstage fight. He terrorized interviewers. He bullied his peers. He once chased an announcer around the ring and threatened to kill him. Goldberg knew all of this. He knew that Steiner was not just a tough guy. Steiner was a bully who thrived on intimidation, and Steiner had the amateur credentials to back it up. For Goldberg, who was often viewed as an outsider by the boys, Steiner represented the hostile force of the locker room, a man who could stretch him, a man who had the temperament to do it on live television if provoked. This was type 3 fear, the fear of unpredictability, the fear of working with someone unsafe, the fear that one wrong move, one accidental stiff shot, one perceived disrespect could turn the match into a real fight. And in a real fight with Steiner, Goldberg was not confident he would win. And now we come to number 1, the apex predator, the one man Bill Goldberg truly feared above all others, the man who represents the ultimate form of all 3 types of fear combined. Number 1 is Meng, also known as Haku. If there is one constant in the lore of professional wrestling toughness, it is Tonga Fafita. He wrestled as King Tonga, as Haku, and as Meng. And across every era, every territory, every locker room, the stories about him are the same. He is the toughest human being to ever step inside a wrestling ring. Not the best worker, not the biggest star, but the toughest, the most dangerous, the one man nobody wanted to fight. Goldberg has explicitly and repeatedly cited Meng as the only man he genuinely feared. He said, "He was the toughest man I have ever been in the ring with." This is profound. Goldberg stood 6'4" and weighed 285 pounds of muscle. He was accustomed to colliding with NFL offensive linemen, but he conceded physical superiority to Meng. He admitted that in a real fight, Meng would destroy him. The fear Meng inspired was not about losing a scripted match. It was rooted in a resume of real violence that reads like urban legend, but is corroborated by dozens of eyewitnesses. The nose-biting incident is one of the most famous. Multiple wrestlers, including Rick Steiner, confirmed that Meng bit a man's nose off during a bar fight. Not a little bite, not a scratch. He bit the entire nose off. The sheer savagery of such an act served as a locker room deterrent. You do not take liberties with a man capable of that. You do not push a man who responds to disrespect with cannibalism. Then there is the mace immunity story. Rick Steiner recounted an incident in Los Angeles where Meng fought 8 police officers. When they sprayed him with mace, he reportedly closed his eyes and sucked it in. He treated the chemical weapon with indifferent disdain. He breathed it in like it was fresh air. Then he continued fighting. This is not exaggeration. This is not kayfabe. This is corroborated by multiple eyewitnesses. Meng fought through mace like it was nothing. Meng's finishing move on television was the Tongan death grip. It looked theatrical. He would grab an opponent's throat or trapezius and they would crumple. But Goldberg and others noted that Meng applied it using legitimate pressure points. When Meng grabbed your trapezius or your throat, he had the grip strength to cause excruciating pain or unconsciousness. He had a mechanism of control that raw power could not break. You could not just muscle out of Meng's grip. You had to hope he let you go. Watching the matches between Goldberg and Meng reveals a different side of Goldberg's persona. Typically, Goldberg bulldozed opponents with little regard for their comfort. He hit hard. He moved fast. He did not wait for his opponents to get into position. But with Meng, the pacing was different. There was a receipt culture at play. If Goldberg laid a stiff forearm in, he knew a harder one was coming back. And Meng's forearms could break bones. The research mentions that Goldberg performed dangerous moves on Meng, specifically dropping him on his head. In most scenarios, a wrestler who does that to a veteran faces severe repercussions. A backstage beating, a shoot during the next match, your car gets vandalized, your career gets sabotaged. But Meng simply absorbed it. He likely viewed it as a rookie mistake rather than malice. And Goldberg's fear was likely retroactive, the realization that he had nearly injured the one man in the company who could end his life. The understanding that if Meng had taken it personally, Goldberg would not have made it to the parking lot. There is a meme in wrestling culture that says, Meng does not hit people with chairs. Chairs hit people with Meng. It sounds like a joke, but it underscores the reality Goldberg lived. Meng was an immovable object, and even the unstoppable force had to navigate him with extreme caution. Goldberg's fear of Meng validates Ric Flair's own list. Flair, who faced Meng in different decades in different companies, also listed him as one of the few men he genuinely feared. This cross-generational consensus highlights that Meng's toughness was not a product of booking or hype. It was not because he was pushed as a monster. It was biological reality. Meng was legitimately capable of killing someone with his bare hands, and everyone in the locker room knew it. For Goldberg, a man who prided himself on intensity, Meng was the ultimate measuring stick. A man who did not need to roar to be terrifying. A man who did not need to brag or boast. A man whose silence was more intimidating than any promo. Meng was the real deal, and Goldberg knew it. In every interview where Meng's name comes up, Goldberg's tone changes. The bravado disappears. The confidence fades. And what remains is genuine respect mixed with genuine fear. So there you have it. The 10 wrestlers Bill Goldberg feared the most. From Kevin Nash's political power, to Scott Steiner's chemical rage, to William Regal's technical humiliation, to Meng's mythical toughness. These were the men who broke the illusion. These were the men who proved that Goldberg's dominance required cooperation. These were the men who reminded him that he was not invincible. Goldberg's career was built on the image of the unstoppable monster, the man who feared nothing, the man who destroyed everyone in his path. But behind that image was a man navigating a predatory industry, a man who understood that one wrong move could end his career, a man who respected the real tough guys because he knew they could dismantle him if they chose to, a man who lived in constant fear of being exposed as less than his character. Fear made Goldberg human, but it also made him insecure. It made him protective of his character. It made him refuse to work with certain people. It made him dangerous in the ring as he aged, and it made him a complex figure in wrestling history. Not just a monster, but a man who survived the Shark Tank by recognizing the sharks that could truly bite. If you enjoyed learning the truth behind Goldberg's fears, hit that like button. Leave a comment telling us which wrestler surprised you the most. And subscribe so you do not miss our next deep dive into wrestling history. Thanks for watching.